Oh, nasty blow, nasty blow.
Viv Richards has just got hit on his jaw. Hogg is now staring him down, and the players of both the teams are now watching Viv with bated breaths. But all of this is the effect. Today's story is about the cause. A bouncer, a ball or tool, a weapon whose aftermath, the 1 second after it has been balled, that can determine the course of an entire match. Today we tell the story of one such bouncer that in the end showed a bouncer is just like any weapon. It can cut both ways. 1975. A young West Indian team has just landed in Australia. Now when I say young, I do mean young. Most of the players playing were either playing their first or the second tour. But just a few months back, the same young team had willed itself to lift the World Cup, defeating Australia in the finals. So, this series was being seen as the unofficial World Championship bout, a battle for the title of the best team in the world. Clive Lloyds with his young bucks on one side and the dangerous bowling lineup of Lillie and Thomson on the other. It was to be a battle of the ages. And as the first match started, as the young bucks playing in Australia for the first time took the field, they were greeted with the chants of "Lillie, Lillie, kill, kill, kill." What happened next was nothing short of a massacre. Taking wickets, winning the match, all that was an afterthought. What was more important was to show the World Cup winners their rightful place. In Australian eyes, that World Cup was nothing more than a fluke, and somebody had to be punished for taking away what was rightfully theirs. So, the Australian pacers entered the field armed with a lethal weapon, the bouncer. Head, ribs, legs, fingers, everything was a valid target. Players after players kept on falling, screaming in agony as they fell to their knees. The test match had suddenly become a boxing match. The batsmen having to duck, weave, sway, hook, pull, do whatever it was necessary just to survive. However, very few did. Their exciting new youngster Greenridge was so crushed by this onslaught that he had to be dropped midway through the series. He later went on to say that 1975 tour was a personal nightmare. So painful that I have spent my life since trying to erase it from my memory. By the end, the West Indian players weren't thinking about winning the match or scoring runs or even saving the wicket. They were just trying to avoid getting hit. Just as the Australian had done at the start, winning was an afterthought at that point. West Indies lost the series 5-1. But much worse than that, Australia, with their bouncers, had crushed the West Indian team. Psychologically, the entire team lay shattered, their confidence lost, their kinship blown apart. And it showed. The very next series, as they played India at home, they would be picked apart by the Indians. The West Indians were champions no more. And it was then, watching as his team failed to save a target of 400, that the captain Clive Lloyds made a decision. Pace bowlers. He would create a battery of pace bowlers. Bowlers who could put fear into the Australian team that had destroyed them. So, in the very next match, he would go to the field with 4 pace bowlers with the same directive that the Australians had got. Forget about wickets. Destroy them. What happened next was a taste of what was to come for the next 15 years. It was the first step in the creation of a team that would dominate world cricket for the next decade. And as this new bowling attack was taking shape, one other person standing on the sidelines had a transformation of his own. Viv Richards. Years later, people would go on to say that Australian tour was the coming of age for Viv Richards. He saw his teammates crumbling under the Australian onslaught. The psychological pressure doing much more damage than any ball ever could. It was the first time he realized the importance of mindset. The mindset with which you play the game, the mindset with which people see you, and the mindset with which people want to destroy you. And through that, Viv would go on to perfect his persona, walking onto the field with his trademark swagger, leisurely chewing a gum as he stared down the bowler, taking his time as he got to the crease, wearing only a cap while facing bowlers that could knock his head off. It was his challenge to the world at large. I am standing right here. Hurt me if you can.
Even when he walked through the gate coming out on the field, the game changed, had a different feel to the way the game was progressing. He had an aura and a presence and a swagger when he came out to the crease.
And as the years passed by, Viv, along with his entire team, continued to develop this new mindset. And it soon came the time for the next World Cup, in preparation for which West Indies once again landed on the shores of Australia. It was the first visit back here after the 1975 humiliation. But by this time, Australia had secured its place as the number one team in the world. And even though they had heard the growing buzz about the West Indian bowling attack that was against other teams, this time they were facing them, the Australians. And standing in front of them were mostly the same faces that they had disfigured back in 1975. So all they had to do was just remind them of that nightmare, and the West Indians would fall apart just like before. But come the first test, what greeted them?
And he's off the mark right away. Flicked it away, hit it pretty hard too. That's 4 runs.
West Indians were that team no more. They stood with their backs straight, taking on the challenge. The entire test devolved into a closely fought match, which most of the time leaned towards the West Indians. And even though it ended in the draw in the end, it was seen as an insult. Australians were the best team in the world at the time. You don't just walk into their lair and draw a match. So, come the second match, the Australians would come out all guns blazing, specifically targeting that one batsman who had nearly single-handedly blasted their entire bowling apart, Viv Richards, the man of the match of the first test. So, right on the first day itself, in came Hogg and did this.
Oh, nasty blow, nasty blow.
Viv was hit on the head. The player who had come to symbolize the West Indian spirit had taken a fall. Everybody on the pitch, everybody in the pavilion suddenly had a flashback to 4 years ago, to that humiliating destruction that had started the very same way. The nightmare had been rekindled, and the reaction that Viv would have now, it might as well decide the entire series. Forget about the series. In future, people would come to say that half a second after Viv got hit, that may have decided the crown of cricket. The half a second after which Viv did this.
You cannot afford to let your opposition know when you're hurt. They stand up and they look you in the eye and they'll look back, and we have this little steering match for a while. You know when you would have got the better of them. By the time they turn around, they pass the umpire and they get back to their mark, they will take a little look around again to see if you're still looking. I'll be still looking.
Viv just kept staring. You may think that he didn't do much here. What's the big deal? But years later, the bowler would go on to say that it was like watching a horror movie where you keep on filling the enemy full of bullets, and yet they keep coming at you. Hogg and his entire team was searching for fear in Vivian's eyes, and what they found was defiance. Defiance and disregard. Disregard for the best team in the world, disregard for one of the best bowlers in the world. And this made Hogg angry. He turned on the very next ball and bowled another bouncer.
What an answer.
The next 50 minutes would be spent on destroying Hogg in every way imaginable. Hogg would bowl just 5 more overs in this match, each of which would be hit for 10 runs, after which Hogg had to retire hurt due to a sprained back. He would not return back to the pitch for nearly a year after this incident, but his one bouncer would have a price to pay, cause suddenly the entire West Indian bowling lineup, a lineup that would later be known as the fearsome foursome, all of them had their floodgates opened. Everything that the Australians had done to them 4 years back, it was paid back in full. Every hit, every ache, every broken bone was accounted for. By the time the onslaught was done, the Australians had lost 2 back-to-back matches. West Indies had won a test series on Australian land for the very first time. And Viv Richards, while earning a groin, leg and back injury due to the retaliatory Australian response, he had went on to score 396 runs in just 4 innings, an average of 96.5. At the end of the tour, the crown had changed hands. They would soon go on to win another World Cup and they would continue to dominate Test cricket for the next 15 years. But it was in this series that cricket in its entirety learned a very important lesson. A bouncer is an amazing weapon, but like any weapon, it cuts both ways. And there are people out there who specialize in turning your weapon against you. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching.